Welcome to Sound and Vision, conversations with contemporary artists and musicians about the creative process. Here's the host of Sound and Vision, Brian Alfred.
Sound and Vision is sponsored by Golden Artist Colors. Golden is a company based in upstate New York and is committed to making the best artist materials for artists to make work with. I've been using Golden paints and mediums for 20 years and I swear by it. You can pick them up in just about every art store and online at goldenpaints.com. If you would like to support this podcast, visit patreon.com/soundandvisionpodcast. When you make a donation to the podcast, you can have your name mentioned on a future pod and even get a hand-drawn thank you. Sound and Vision is made possible by listeners like you. Elise Ferguson is an artist based out of Brooklyn. She was born in 1964 in Richmond, Virginia, and received her BFA from the Art Institute of Chicago and her MFA from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She's had solo shows at Odd Arc in Los Angeles, Romer Young in San Francisco, Halsey McKay in East Hampton, 106 Green in Brooklyn, White Columns, and many more. She's had numerous group shows, and her work has been covered in Contemporary Art Daily, Art News, Interior Design, The New York Times, New York Magazine, Newsday, and many others. She's done residencies at MacDowell Colony, UNLV, Barton College, and the Socrates Sculpture Park Residency. I stopped by Elise's Ridgewood studio for a conversation about Florida youth, seeing live music, being around fabric, navigating between sculpture and painting, and much more. Here's our conversation. Okay, got my gallon of coffee.
Okay.
Are you a coffee drinker?
I quit coffee.
You did?
I drink tea.
So tea doesn't... Cause
Tea's not as bad. And
has
then,
some caffeine.
Honestly, if you really want to maintain sort of like a psychological balance,
yeah,
it's like less sugar, less alcohol, more exercise,
right,
less caffeine. Like basic good life recipe.
Yes. I mean, I do the exercise and I do I try to rest and all that, but I can't yet give up the coffee.
Yeah, coffee's important.
The studies for the sort of antioxidant and keeping Parkinson's and Alzheimer's away.
Yeah.
Like I haven't done those studies, but I'm grabbing onto those and saying.
And do you have those in your family? Are you like, is there someone that you know in your family that's had either one of those diseases?
I don't know that, but if it's one of those things, you know, like when there's a supplement,
you take it.
Well, yeah, like the elderberry thing for like keeping from getting sick.
Oh, I don't know that, but yeah.
It's like the sambucol or whatever it is. Oh. Anyways, it's this thing that's supposed to help your immune system.
Are you a turmeric person?
I did a little turmeric, but I've heard that it doesn't really take.
But that's the word.
But my point, the reason is, I feel like if psychologically it helps you feel better, I think that's important.
No, it's true.
Like if you feel more, I get the flu shot every year.
Yeah.
And that one seems to work.
Right.
Because I didn't get it for a while.
I know, I wasn't doing it forever. And I was just worried, because they always say like, oh, you may get flu-like symptoms. I'm like, that would actually be enough of a reason for me not to bother forever and ever.
Yeah.
But now I just get it. But then I heard this like one in a zillion horror stories about I met this guy in California who got the flu shot and he's like partially paralyzed from it. So I try not to think about that guy.
I mean, I would imagine that the odds of that are the same thing with me
slim.
Getting hit by a B-48 on the way out of here.
But if you're not quite a joiner on a thing and you see an example of like why you shouldn't join.
Yeah.
So I try not to think about him
too
much.
Yeah. I remember this was I think it was when my son was a newborn or like a 1 year old or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember over the Christmas holiday getting the flu with like 104 fever. It felt like someone beat me with a baseball bat for a day.
It is a weird, achy, bruisey feeling.
104 point something fever.
Isn't that like hospital bound?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, I'm getting a flu shot.
Right. Yeah.
And knock on wood.
No flus?
No flu since.
That's good.
I mean, you could tell when you get something, but it's just not as severe.
Yeah, I know. I think sometimes people say they have the flu, but they don't really have the flu.
Right. Yeah. And the same thing with the stomach flu. They're like, I have the flu. It's like, not really.
Yeah, and you ate a bad oyster.
Yeah, it's a stomach virus, which is brutal,
right.
Brutal as well.
Yeah.
I mark my calendar every year. I'm like, I know there's going to be 2 days where I'm just
Gonna feel shitty.
that stomach bug.
Oh, really? You get a stomach bug annually?
Usually.
Oh, that's wretched.
It's horrible.
And is barfing involved?
Definitely.
Ooh.
It's the main character.
Yeah, I haven't
It's
thrown
the leading
up since
role.
the 80s. I
Oh, really?
don't throw up. Yeah.
I actually got food poisoning when I went on this Barcelona trip over
Oh,
Thanksgiving.
no. So you're prone. Maybe you need more kombucha.
Well, I've been taking probiotics.
Yeah.
So
But you
hopefully.
got to eat, you got to eat those cultures, like food.
Yeah, I have the yogurt and all that stuff.
But you got
I'm
to eat
trying.
like kimchi and stuff.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm a huge kimchi
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
I'm trying. Maybe it's my Achilles.
Yeah, I'm sort of like newly obsessed with intestinal flora.
Yes, me too. Like
Yeah.
it's a really
It's a
interesting
good thing. I mean, that's also one of those things you read about, like happy gut, happy mind.
Right.
You know, the sort of gut brain loop.
Yeah, and that a lot of the other healthy aspects of your body is
Like spring
controlled
from
by
your
your
gut.
gut.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
makes sense.
It does make sense.
That's where the energy in the food comes in.
Yeah.
You might want to keep that on the up and up.
I know, and it takes a long time to realize, that even the just sort of fight or flight basic human impulse is I mean, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of it is based in your digestive tract, like what happens in that moment.
Right. Yeah, anytime you flinch or something, you clench your gut.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I feel tight.
That's funny.
Well, let's get into your upbringing.
Okay.
Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Richmond, Virginia.
That's right. Your bio, you're online as far as I can tell, and I didn't go deep cover, but I mean, there's not a ton of bio information out there, is there?
About me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm not sure why. Yeah. Anyway, so I was born in Richmond, Virginia.
What's Richmond like? I'm trying to think of.
Richmond now is very different from Richmond when I was there. So I'm 55. So
Right.
when I was born there, it was still like hard southern Richmond, which is like, it was the capital of the South during the Civil War. And my Virginia family was multi-generations of Virginia citizenry. And so like both my parents have the classic Richmond accent. It's like, how Monets and is your mother and your father. It's like this really thick accent.
Yeah.
And,
but it sounds kind of.
It sounds a little regal. It sounds a little like you can hear the kind of colonial residue in that accent.
Yeah.
And sometimes it sounds kind of British. So anyway, my dad got a job when I was almost 2, and we relocated to Jacksonville, Florida. And so I was there from 2 to 18, and
Jacksonville.
Yeah, and it's like Skinnerd country,
Right.
and
sports, right? Football.
Not
football?
then.
Oh,
there was
really?
no football back then.
Oh, okay.
What do they call those expansion teams? So
Yeah,
now
right,
the
right.
Jaguars came along like much later because there's there's college football around Florida.
Oh, that's what I meant, basically.
Oh, yeah, because like the Gators were a
Right.
big deal. But like in my family, we weren't like a sports family at all.
Wait, what was their racket?
So any kind of the sporty thing that happened in our family was my stepfather, who was sort of inherently athletic, and he would ride his bike every day, and he would ski and surf, and he sailed. So he was and played tennis regularly. So he was like a exercise every day kind of guy.
A sporty guy.
But
not from Florida originally?
He was actually from Jack's Beach. So he grew up at the beach.
Well, how does one get into skiing from that
You just kind of go, like how anybody
Trips.
gets into skiing. You just go to the mountains. And so they would fly to the Rockies, and like he was a good skier. There's a picture in our house growing up. It was like him in like one of those silver puffy jackets with he was in a race or something. He was like champion level, but he was a accomplished skier.
Yeah.
And so anyway, my stepfather was an architect, and my mom had a business where she made women's clothing. So it started off as a small company where everything was handmade locally by women around the town. And the business grew, maybe it took like 15 years, and it grew to the level of like where she had a factory and sort of a wholesale line. And then because it's the South, a lot of that product that she was making was bridesmaids dresses. It's like this huge industry of just making all these dresses. And then it scaled back down to sort of what was described as a cottage industry, where she had like maybe like 6 or 8 seamstresses. And then she had a store. And so you would come to the store and you could either buy something that was like on the racks, or you could go into the back of the store and meet with her and discuss like a shirt or pants or skirt, or like, and go through fabrics and like discuss and take measurements, and they would design these garments together.
Like a custom sort of
super
thing?
Custom.
Yeah.
And so interestingly, her clientele kind of aged with her.
Right.
And then so by the end it was like sort of like women with a little bit of money who wanted something really tailored to their like aging bodies. And then my parents were super liberal. And my stepfather's architecture studio was on one end of this little shopping strip, and then her shop was on the other. So they were kind of like the king and queen of this little retail zone.
Yeah.
And my mom's shop became sort of like a hub, like people would stop in. It was very social.
Were you there often?
Well, by the time it was sort of like up and running and super fun, I had left.
Okay.
That's not true. I mean, I worked there in high school.
You were around fabric, though.
Yeah, definitely around lots of fabric. And I remember like the store was in full whatever during high school. And I remember going there, and like my summer job was like folding T-shirts and like putting stuff away from the dressing room.
Right.
Definitely the smell of lots of fabric in a windowless area is like a major
specific, right?
Yeah, very specific. That sort of sizing smell.
And what's the fashion like? Like, what years are we talking as far as like the look?
Awesome 80s fashions.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
kind of sad that I don't have a lot of the stuff that because my mom gave me a ton of stuff that's like ruffly and like floral and sort of vibrant colors.
Bright, right.
And lots of shoulder pads.
Yeah.
And
I can see the John Hughes movie right now.
it was a lot like that. And there's a few, like I Googled my mom's business name and found a few super amazing dresses on Etsy.
Oh, that like from
that people
that
are
shop.
selling. Yeah,
that's cool.
It's something like bespoke garment from blah blah blah.
Right. It's like a deep cut, like a kind of like not many people would know about it.
I know. I mean, there's like a in the Southeast, if you're a certain kind of female that went to like Sweetbriars, you know what I mean? There's like a certain kind of like Southern client that will run into my mom. Like my mom was in some store in like High Point, North Carolina, and they were like, "Are you Blair Wolverton?"
Oh, really?
So she has like a cult following in a certain area.
Yeah, but I imagine since a lot of that stuff was being custom made, it was
super beautifully constructed
and hard to come by.
Hard to come by, and my mom was a real taskmaster. I mean, her seamstress had to be perfect.
Yeah.
So.
Well, did you grow up under that rule?
Yeah, but it's funny because like I wish I'd learned to sew. The problem was like if I had something wrong, my mom had a team of people who could fix the garment.
Right.
So sadly, I never even buzzed something through a sewing machine growing up.
I feel like that's a parent quandary of like, do you let a lot of times when you're good at something or, and you see your kid trying it and you're like, that's just easier. Here, let me do it.
Right.
But then you feel like you're not letting them learn
and grow. Right. Right. Letting them fall down.
That's bad parenting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I could have asked.
Yeah.
I could have expressed more interest in it. I mean, it wasn't that they thwarted creativity at all.
Right.
Like went to like art camps and did all kinds of creative things.
Yeah.
Because it was a creative household.
Yeah. So you're just around that. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah,
you're in an environment where it's like, okay, this can happen.
Yeah.
And this is what we do. And it's a creative thing.
Yeah. And they were supportive. They weren't like, don't wander off into that sticker patch of being an artist.
Yeah.
There was never that. That was never the message.
Well, what's school like in high school?
Well, I actually went to Episcopalian schools from first grade to 12th grade.
How was that?
It was just, I don't know. I think my mom kind of wandered over to this certain school in this certain neighborhood when we first got to Jacksonville. And my mom wanted to kind of like anchor into a neighborhood that she deemed as like nice. And the people reminded her of like Richmond people. So we ended in this like kind of specific neighborhood. And then there was a school in that neighborhood that I just went there. And then my parents are atheists. So it just happened to be because they were good schools and sort of a good community. I think that was the priority.
Right.
And So 1st through 6th at this school called St. Mark's, and then in 7th to 12th I went to this other school called Episcopal High School, which again, it's funny, like, well, when I went to the elementary school, I think we went to chapel every day.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in a way when you think about these like Catholic schools that just let anyone in,
Yeah.
they're liberal in the sense that like they'll let you in even if they must know that you're not like a hardcore religious person.
Yeah, it was never, no one ever quizzed, no one ever asked me what was my relationship with Jesus. Like never for 12 years. They
It's just like, here it is.
They'll just like indoctrination was just like part of the curriculum.
Right.
But I don't remember it being like extra Jesus-y in the classroom.
Yeah.
But I think remember we would go to chapel and then what happened there. And then I don't think there was communion. So then in high school, we would go to chapel every Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was definitely communion because I remember being a high school stoner and be like, yum, a little bit of, you're like a little munchies in the morning, whatever.
Right.
So I definitely remember that as being a thing. And then there was like 2 classes in high school that were, one was like straight learn the Bible, religious studies. And then the other one was more of like a history of religion or like the philosophy of religion, which I actually really liked.
Right.
And I remember being really inspired actually by the Father George, this guy who taught the class. Mm-hmm. And then coming home and sort of spouting something that sounded vaguely Bible-y. Mm-hmm. And then my stepfather like dropping his fork on the plate, like, what are they teaching her at that school?
It's almost like we're sending her to a religious school.
I know, it was very funny. It was one of my favorite memories from that whole thing.
Right. But I'm sure that's like good stuff to learn in the sense. I mean,
I think so.
It's on your radar.
Right. And I think it's important to be literate of world religions.
And belief and how that can integrate into education or just, development in a way.
No, totally. And
I mean, I'm sure it's hard to have that perspective when you're sitting there in 8th grade in chapel or what, you know what I mean? But
yeah, I don't think I had any like deep insights, but I remember it clicking in some way. And then, so I've definitely sort of been interested in a super, not rigorous way about the history of religions, just curious.
Yeah.
And I think, here in my life now, I'm still super curious about religions while simultaneously being confused by it. Like how are so many people living with that as their main filter?
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason that I keep on a quest to understand it.
It would be like if you were in 7th grade and you took a trip to like Sri Lanka or something.
Yeah.
You may not wrap your head around that trip, but it sort of opens up that box of like curiosity of other places and travel and other
through
cultures.
Discomfort.
Yeah. And just unfamiliarity, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because it, opens up possibility in a way. I never thought I'd be sitting here talking about espousing the benefits of going to religious school.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was an equivalent school across town called Bowles, and I think, and that was like more of a football school. Mm-hmm. So I think because my parents were so non-jockey, and then I think there was some other kind of weird decision making that was like, oh, certain people went here. I don't know how they decided to send me to the Episcopalian school, but it's a good school. I mean, I think now it's a much, much better school because school is so much harder now.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't a good student by any stretch, but I was a capable student. I somehow got B's.
What about art? Did they have art class?
Yeah, they had art class. They had a really like cool little building at the top of the campus that was called the Acosta House, and it was like a freestanding sort of Victorian building. With two art teachers, and they were both like dedicated, super sweet, interesting. And I remember kind of I would take art classes, but I remember noticing there was other students that were more dedicated than me.
Right.
I remember thinking like, I had like a motivational problem or a focusing problem, but I would go and I would take classes and I was into it, but I must not have really like been proud of what I made or something. It was always like, I can't quite nail it, because, I mean, now that I've been working as a studio artist for so many decades, I don't draw. I don't really like to draw. Mm-hmm. I use a pencil, but I don't draw things.
Right.
And then, when you go into, as a child, you're constantly drawing. They're like, okay, here's some plants and shoes, draw. Here's naked people, draw. Mm-hmm. And so I did it, but it wasn't like, oh, this is me.
It wasn't your thing.
It wasn't my thing. So, ceramics I remember getting into. I mean, like growing up, so my sister was also an artist. And then when we were growing up as kids, like she would watercolor azaleas and I would like build Lego. Right. So it was like, I was like a makey buildy kind of person.
Yeah.
And she's still painting and drawing to this day. And I'm still more kind of like, I mean, I make paintings now, but they're like paintings a sculptor would make.
Right.
Out of like plaster.
Where is she based out of?
So she lives in Denver now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's where my brother lives.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's cool. So, whenever you graduated high school, what was the plan then? Like, what
Get
did
the
you...
fuck out. Just leave as quickly as possible.
As far away.
I mean, like in high school, I had 2 friends, and we were into music, and we were kind of like reading like Interview magazine. We were imagining life beyond, like my mom's couch.
Like a little Warhol.
Yeah, a lot of Warhol.
Velvet Underground. What was the music like scene like growing up?
The music. I mean, I remember like. So you know, my first like, oh, I like music was in 4th grade, and I bought like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. I got Elton John. I was super into it, like really big Elton John fan. And then like kind of like in my early teen years, kind of wandered into just sort of like Florida stuff. Mm-hmm. Like Ted Nugent and like,
oh goodness,
you know, yeah,
he's a Florida guy?
Like Foghat and like,
yeah.
in the Skinnerd and like Molly Hatchet, like all that stuff. It was just like in the air when I was like 12, 13, 14. And then I don't know what happened, but I think it must have been like my friends through friends. We started getting into like new wave music. Mm-hmm. And so this is like 1979, 1980.
Right. This is when it's just starting.
It's just, well, I mean, kind of like just starting for us. Like now that I kind of know what was happening in 1979, like we were kind of way behind a little bit, but like still into like you know, like the B-52s were like a local kind of like Southern act, and like that band Pylon out of Athens. I was super into them. But I remember like in my bedroom, like listening to like, you know, television and magazine and like Suicide. Like we would go to the stores and like buy these albums. And so I had pretty progressive taste for like a kid who lived where I did.
Yeah.
But that was like through like a small friend network that we would like discover music together.
Was there like a record shop?
There was a record shop. Yeah. And I think actually my main friend worked at that record shop, but like, yeah, it was like the thing of where you would go and browse, and we'd see shows. And then like I had like, there was like a local place where bands would play. And
yeah, Florida always has bands coming through. Maybe it's just the weather or something.
Yeah.
But like when bands go on tour, they're going to dip down to Florida.
They do. And like now there's like a couple of decent venues at like the beach. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'll notice that like somebody I'll see up here is then doing a show down there. And I think, oh, that would have been 10 times more amazing.
Right.
So you'd be like right up there.
Yeah. Was New Order, and when did New Order start? They were late 70s, right? Like the early so. New Order.
Yeah, right. Like right after he died. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I don't remember the chronology, but yeah, like definitely around that time.
And Joy Division.
And and I remember like Joy Division was really important at that point. I remember because I went to college, and then I had like my first real boyfriend from Jacksonville, and then it was summer, and then I went to college in DC. And then I did that sort of classic thing where I like didn't break up with the guy, even though I was like off for the rest of my life.
Long distance, and he was still
forever. A little long distance, and then back at Thanksgiving, like broke up, you know?
Right.
And I remember sitting in my dorm room listening to Love Will Tear Us Apart. It's like super meaningful.
That's what it's for, right?
I know. So good.
Which is funny now when you see like that T-shirt is so popular, and I don't think most of the people even know who Joy Division is. You know,
yeah, but luckily now there's lots of movies that sort of chronicle and really go deep into like the epilepsy. Oh, I forgot about that. The timer on the light.
That's okay. This is nice.
It's more moody now.
This dramatic lighting comes in.
So yeah, because I really didn't know that much about him, and through various movies and documentaries and stuff, just learning about the debilitating health problems.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like back then, the way you got your information on that stuff was pretty limited.
Yeah.
Like, I remember growing up and getting into New Music Express.
Oh,
like
totally. The magazines were the thing.
Yeah, like, that's how you would learn about, like, I remember My Bloody Valentine, like, being into them.
Yeah.
And you just didn't know anything about them.
Right.
And then you would get those
so like music
or
press was important.
Yeah. You just get that interview, and it's like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And now I know a little bit about them.
I know.
But that mystique was kind of nice.
Right. And because back then I was like, on a quest to discover. And now I'm like at this point in my life where I just kind of receive music.
Yeah, it discovers you.
Yeah, like that's a polite way of saying it.
Yeah, it washes over.
That's like a Spotify sales pitch.
I know, it's hard to imagine not having, you know what I mean, seeing both sides of that coin. And I know that it's like an old person thing to be like, oh, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine like growing up and not hunting down music and going to record stores and like waiting. Remember when they would wait? There was like a release date.
Oh, yeah.
And you would wait until the record store got it, which wasn't the release date. It would take time, you know, and you just like keep going back and like waiting.
Yeah. I don't know if I ever did that. I think I was just more like, I'm not sure. I don't remember that as like a thing. I mean, maybe my friend who was like, maybe he was more focused on the releases, but like, but to me, like when I think of that, like I think of like, oh, I can't imagine a life without that kind of desire. Like that was what separated from me from everyone else I went to school with. Like they didn't, I don't know what their interests were, but they weren't mine. And we didn't have a lot in common. And I remember having like, you know, discovering like homophobia really early through like the kids I went to high school with, because my two friends were gay. And so I remember thinking like, this is a bad fit. I don't like it here. My people aren't here. I need to go.
Right. And
that's why I left. And now I think like when I go to Jacksonville now, where two of my nephews are still living down there and they're active sort of in the music scene, and one's like a pretty accomplished jazz musician. And so their lives are very rich and full, and they have like lots of collaborators, and they're mixed race, so their world is a lot more open than mine was.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to compare Jacksonville then and Jacksonville now.
Well, I think that's one of the benefits, is that the world is a lot smaller. You know,
right.
Maybe even if it's through media and through, you know, videos or YouTube or whatever it is, you feel like you can identify with your quote unquote like your people, you know.
Yeah, right.
Like remember like the goth people growing up, it was like it was hard. There were 3 or 4, you know what I mean? And
I'm sure there was one in my school. Yeah, she was good.
Like you had your band, like your couple music acts or whatever that you could relate to, but now I feel like with the internet you could just be like, oh yeah, those are my people.
Yeah.
And you know, like the punks could find the punks and the hip hop people, and you just say to yourself, well, I'm going to go somewhere where it's more conducive to that.
I know. It's funny. It used to just be about a shirt. Like you wore a piece of clothing and it was like the signifier.
Right.
Like that's how I found my friends when I went to college. So I left Jacksonville and I went to Washington, D.C.
Wait, where did you go to college?
I went, you know, I just was kind of like applying to various schools. So I applied to like schools in Boston and schools in D.C. I ended up going to American University. For no real, I just was like, let me get out of here. Let me go to a city. I wasn't ready for New York, but I knew I wanted to be in a larger place.
Was it like a liberal arts thing? Like you didn't know exactly?
I totally didn't know what I was up to.
You're just going to go to school?
Yeah, I went to school and I was like super misguided, and I applied with incredibly mediocre SAT scores to be a business major, because I was like, I'm gonna take over my mom's business. I just had like teenage ideas about what life was,
right? And
that was what was in front of me. So I was like, oh, that's what I'll do. And then I quickly realized that no, not at all. And then so when I got to school, I started taking art classes at American University, and then realized immediately I needed to go to art school.
Yeah, this feels right. Isn't it funny how you go to a couple business classes and you're just it reveals itself. It reveals itself quickly. It's like, nah, this is not for me.
I'm just idiotic. And then because you know when you're a teenager, you just like checking boxes. You're like, you don't really know.
You don't know yet. That's the odd. I mean, I say it all the time. College is kind of not wasted, but you know, it would be so much more effective.
Yeah.
If you could go to college when you're like 35.
I know.
Because then you feel like, okay, this is what I'd really like to do.
I did kind of go to grad school in my mid-30s, which was helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure it was better than if you were like 20.
I think so, because so I went to a lot of undergrad. I went to 3 schools. So I was at AU for 2 semesters. Then I took a little bit off, and then I transferred to MICA in Baltimore. And I was there for like a year and a half. And then that at the time when I was there, it was... I didn't really know what I was up to, and I wanted something more interdisciplinary, and they made you pick a major in Baltimore. So then I transferred to School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where you could just...
That's a lot of hopping around.
A lot of hopping around. And I was into it. I was like excited with the next like horizon.
Next,
yeah. And then I stuck around Chicago for 12 years, but I remember by the time I did finish my BFA, I hadn't figured out what kind of artist I was, but I had done a lot of stuff. So it was still like a bunch of like disparate parts that I hadn't quite turned into like a thing yet.
Yeah.
But then by the time then there was 10 years. And then when I did go to grad school, also in Chicago at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I was ready to go back to grad school. I was super dying to have this sort of like intensive, 2 years of people really like gazing upon you and wanting to know your every thought, which is like a total luxury.
Definitely.
So I sat there and just like drank it up. Where some of the people I went to grad school with had come straight in from a BFA, and had like school fatigue, and they had sort of like a slightly what I perceived as like a juvenile attitude about what this thing was.
Yeah. It's funny because I went straight from undergrad to grad just because, I didn't know what to do. And I applied if I get in, I'll go. If not, then I'll figure out something. And when I went, there was the situation you're talking about was there. But then there were also some students who hadn't been, like they took 5 to 10 years off or whatever.
Yeah.
And when they went to grad school, they were like, oh, this is time. Like you could tell that they were just beaten by life after year. So they just wanted to take it easy.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Yeah. So they worked, but it was like more of like, I'll just go in for a few hours and then I'm just going to go cook a nice dinner and have people over. You know what I mean? And
so they were basically taking a little vacation.
Yeah. It's like kind of time off.
And what school was it?
Yale.
That's funny because at least mine was super small and kind of like everyone was like up your ass, like what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
No, it was like that too.
But mine was cheap.
UIC, right?
Yeah, it was like dirt cheap. So if someone were gonna like just chill and like drink coffee and like have studio visits, at least you weren't leaving with $100,000 in debt.
Yeah, that's true.
So there was,
and I to be honest, I think that was maybe like 2 people who were
stuck out,
rocking out that way. But
and they're listening now, and they know exactly who they are.
Yeah, they're probably not listening. They're probably just having dinner parties or something.
Yeah, right,
just chilling. But yeah, that's true. Like you want to get the most out of it. So you felt like taking that time off was really. Yeah. Where did you live in between?
So so when I relocated to Chicago in '85, so I finished up the undergrad. I think I was at School of the Art Institute for a year and a half. So then there was 10 years of still being in Chicago.
What'd you do?
So I just had a million jobs. I was an artist. I never had a full-time job.
Were you making a lot of work?
I was doing stuff. I definitely was doing stuff.
What was it
doing
like?
Freaky stuff. Like I was, by the time I left, like when I was finishing up in undergrad, I was making a lot of like costumes and like organizing my friends to be in like parades and making weird videos. And I would do like, so it was the 80s and there was a lot of, like, remember the Pyramid Club in the East Village? Where they would like, people would do like performance art and nightclubs. Like it was big in the 80s in the East Village. And so it kind of like trickled into Chicago. So we would do like wild, freaky performance art stuff and like costumes in nightclubs, like gay bars. And so I was doing that kind of stuff. And then
there's a lot of music going on too.
Tons of music.
I mean, Chicago's a great music town.
And I've always been like a go to shows kind of person. And so like when I landed in DC, I sort of landed in DC like the peak years of like DC hardcore in '82. Yeah, and sort of like fell into a group of people that were like in the middle of all that scene.
Yeah, Discord, the early days of Discord.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And then, like had like my boyfriend was like all part of this little group of people around that whole scene.
There's a lot of attitude in that scene.
But I was so young and nobody was mean to me. I was just kind of like absorbing it. I was just sort of like going to the shows, seeing the stuff, being into it.
It's intense.
I mean, I would never get up close, and I wouldn't like any hardcore show. I wasn't like near the stage at all. I was like back, and there was like the main club in DC, the 930 Club,
of course,
where you could like stand back, or you could go to like the back bar, where like the ultra cool people hung out.
930, like when did 930 open?
I think it was. Maybe it's in late 70s, early 80s. I mean, because they had been up and running when I got there at 82.
Forever.
Yeah, forever.
And the Black Cat, was that around in those
That
days?
was around, yep.
Man, those places dig in.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. So like, like I was, friendly with like bands and stuff around then in that town. And
Who were the sort of younger bands at that point?
Well, it was Minor Threat. It was like pre-Fugazi.
Yeah.
It was like the Slicky Boys were like, these were my friends, and they were in that band. And then just like bands that came through town.
Yeah.
And then there was like tons of like dudes that had bands that kind of had one EP, and,
Right.
and that was that.
A 7-inch.
And now they're like scientists and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
in Chicago, were you sort of tapped into the scene as far as music?
Yeah, because I had like a couple of like boyfriends that were music writers, and I had really close friends that were DJs at like a good radio station. So there was always like tickets to be had, like lists to get on, and like lots of like opportunities to see tons of music.
Yeah.
And then and I would also just like, just pay to go to see tons of shows too. So I definitely saw a lot of stuff. I mean, it was like 12 years of shows, but like lots of those like Chicago bands, the sort of like Wilco ilk, and like the Liz Phair, and then like the Smashing, like all, and like the Urge Overkill, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What about like this like younger or little more indie bands like the Cocktails or like Shrimp
I
Boat?
saw them. Shrimp Boat played their first show at my apartment.
Really?
Yes.
So did you know Sam?
Sam, yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So I had this like super crappy, creepy basement apartment. And
crappy and creepy.
It was super crappy and creepy. And
where, Wicker Park or something?
It was straight in Wicker Park. It was like North and Damon in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And it was and me and my 3 roommates, we like threw this big party, and Shrimp Boat played their first show there.
That's pretty cool.
It was good until like these drug dealers like made their way into the party and like stole everybody's purses.
Oh, jeez.
And so there was like 2 guys. Like one guy like made out like a bandit, like with robbing, and the other guy made out like a bandit, like selling tons of drugs.
This is a dual operation.
It was a dual operation. One guy had his car stolen, and and so that was kind of a big night. Like that was a big night in the history books in my life.
Yeah, because I mean that's a lot of formative music stuff that's going on.
Yeah,
it seems like you were in these places
in a hot moment.
Yeah, like in their formative.
Yeah.
Like the Bunsen burner stages of it before it kind of came, like, because Chicago kind of hit the map as far as like the indie music scene there. Mm-hmm. But that's a little after, I would imagine. Yeah. Like, when did you graduate UIC?
So I graduated UIC 96.
And then
I moved here 97.
Okay.
Maybe I graduated 95 because I stuck around for a year after grad school. And when I was in grad school, I worked at a bar in Wicker Park. It was like a kind of a perfect gig.
Rainbow Room?
Right around the corner.
Okay.
Oh my God, I'm forgetting what it's called. Intertown Pub.
Don't know it.
Sometimes called the Inner Thigh.
Clever.
But yeah, it was like right around the corner from Rainbow.
Yeah.
And it's like the same sort of like crowd of like band dudes and like rock chicks or whatever, like bike messengers.
Yeah, with those, I mean, just in the same thing with 930, I imagine Empty Bottles around at that time.
Yeah, so it's like, that's like maybe like a half a mile west.
And
it's like all in the same.
Fireside Bowl was, did you ever go there too?
Fireside Bowl, I didn't. I had friends that did sound, and they would always go to those. They would like maybe work those shows.
Those are like a little more punk.
More punk, and I think I'd kind of like aged out of that thing a little bit.
Yeah.
But I definitely had like friends that were like, they would do sound for those sort of those shows.
I love that there was sound, like, because the Fireside, when you play there, it's a bowling alley.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
wasn't even really like a venue.
Right. I mean, it's the same as like playing a church basement, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, but it was such a, like, I remember before going to Chicago to play, you would hear, because I had a lot of friends who went to Chicago to play music, and you hear the lore of a place. You know what I mean? Like, you hear about it and the bands that play there, and you're like, oh, I want to check that out.
Yeah.
And then you go to it, and it's just like, oh, it's just a crappy.
Which I think are the better, more memorable shows.
Oh, definitely.
Really.
The kind of basement shows are some of the best ones
that
I've ever been to.
I know. I remember seeing the Violent Femmes in some crappy church basement.
Oh, that's awesome.
So those kind, you just really remember that somehow more, I think. Than
Well,
like
it's more intimate.
Yeah.
You know, and there's usually a story about it.
Yeah.
I feel like basement shows usually there's some sort of story, whether it's you or the band or something.
Right.
There's
I remember
something
seeing
to
the Replacements a lot, and those were always memorable shows.
In like small venues?
Very small venues.
Wow.
Yeah, because I remember like so that band, the Slicky Boys, they were like this DC kind of like punk pop band. They I remember they opened for the Replacements a few times in pretty small venues.
Yeah.
And they would always use like crash and burn shows.
Right. That's
Ended
cool.
up with like, broken things and tears,
Yeah. Like like damage left behind, scorched earth,
the emotional wreckage like laid bare. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, with the work that you're doing at this time, I guess in grad school, what's the work like?
So in grad school, what was I doing? So I entered in just like whatever, doing some like stuff that wasn't very interesting, and I was still really searching for, I don't know, like the voice, like whatever artists search for that is their voice. So I was still looking, and then so the school that I went to was a regular university, so I was able to take a real art history class and like a philosophy class,
Gen Eds as they call them, general education.
Yeah, because like all the other schools in my undergrad were art schools, and so like your humanities are kind of watered down and a little whatever, like easy-fied.
Right.
So I think that was like I was like, okay, I'm just going to go. I went in hard. Like I was the opposite of those like chill grad friends you had. I was like, I'm going to do it all and I'm going to work super hard. Yeah. So I started kind of like making, I think the seeds of where I'm at today was where I was like trying to make sculptures about paintings. And then filtered through all kinds of like what I would describe as like less relevant sort of theories that I was reading about. I was like trying to like process this like theory stuff that I was reading in grad school and like make work that like somehow reflected this like increased knowledge.
Right. Remember those days of like,
yeah,
oh, I've got to like fit my work, or it's got to resonate.
Kind of tailor. Yeah. And I remember making like a couple of like, oh, nailed it. Like a couple pieces I was like, oh, nailed it.
Yeah.
But then because I didn't really have like some sort of like natural rhythm to my art making, I couldn't move. I couldn't move from that point. I was like, well, I just nailed it with this one piece in grad school, but I don't know what to do after that. So
did you just repeat?
No, I just was sort of stumped, and then I just was like tried some other stuff, and they were like passable, and like and it's like you sink or swim by like a crit, which is this sort of like weird false world. But then as I was like getting close to, I took a class actually that was kind of like, oh, there's something I can grab onto about German Romanticism and the Sublime and the sort of like Caspar David Friedrich, that kind of world. I was like, oh, there's something here that's like meaningful to me. So I started kind of like, that's where I started delving into this this project of like trying to make sculptures that were about painting.
Yeah.
And so I did these sort of like landscapey kind of projects. Like right after I left grad school, I made a video of a set. I made a giant set in my last year there. I was in a super giant loft space. So I made this huge set that was like probably like 12 feet wide by like 40 feet long of like what would be like a ruin, like an ancient ruin made out of clay, basically. So I cast all these brick parts and like just kept building and building and building, and then made a video of me just sort of like circumnavigating it, just like this slow, and then slowed it down in an edit. So it's just this kind of like meditation on a ruin.
And how did you show it?
As a video, just as a grainy video, because I made it on that. God, I think I might have even shot it on that Fisher Price Pixel Vision.
Oh, one of
so
those
it's like
things.
Super grainy.
Yeah,
and like crappily lit. And so it was like, and then I did make some sculptures that were like in the room versions of ruins.
Yeah, and
I remember thinking like, this is not it. It's not nailing the thing that I'm going for, which is like a memory.
Right.
So that's why the video was more effective. It was like once, twice removed, and it was grainy, and then it was slow. And then shortly thereafter, I moved to New York.
And what were you thinking? I'm just going to go do this?
I was just ready. I was like, okay, well, I could stay here and like maybe my options are this, that, and the other, or I could just go. I could go and have my options be like a world of options.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people do dig their heels into Chicago.
Yeah. I have lots of friends that are there and happy.
Town
and like, I mean, they got big old houses and like it's much more comfortable.
Yeah.
But
what are you saying? It's expensive to live in New York.
So I got here and so the decade between the MFA and the BFA, I just had like a zillion sort of what jobs that artists get, like fabricating. I worked for like TV commercials. I worked for party companies. I worked for theater companies. I was like fabricating things. I'm wardrobe stylist, prop fabricator, like a million jobs.
Freelance Central.
Like you name it, I had that job. Like backdrop shop. And like the best one was like this crappy company where they did like party displays. Mm-hmm. And lots of artists had this job where you would make like the foam core football for the bar mitzvah, all those like table and party decorations, just like churning them out. And so I had like, at this point, in the 80s, you would have like a book where you would have like pictures of your stuff.
Oh, like the portfolio.
A portfolio. Yeah. And then I went to grad school and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do a little teaching. I'm going to keep my bartending gig. And that's like a more kind of like better suited life for me as this like newly grad schooled person.
Right.
So then by the time I moved to New York, getting a teaching job here like is next to impossible when you first roll in. Mm-hmm. And so I had this book, I had all these pictures, I had all this experience, and I just like started looking for like fabrication shops, like model shops and things like that. So I immediately got work right away.
What was the work? Like, what were you making?
I worked in these model shops that did like, like there's like a sketch on Saturday Night Live where they need a set or a prop or like a giant hot dog suit, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So all those kind of things that they used on Saturday Night Live were farmed out to these small shops. So I worked for this, did some freelance jobs here and there with just like shops like that. Mm-hmm. And then I worked for this like horrible job doing the window displays, Lord & Taylor, like the Christmas window displays.
Oh, did you work for Lord & Taylor?
No, it was like some other gross shop where you like where they made those like animatronic, creepy.
Like Spaith, like one of those places. So my first job was Windows.
Oh,
I worked at Macy's.
Spaith, horrible.
Yeah, well, I mean, Spaith basically, what Macy's would do would like farm out.
Oh yeah.
Those Christmas windows. So we would just do all the side ones.
Yeah.
Like the Broadway windows we weren't allowed to touch.
Right.
That was like the big thing that they spent all the money on. We did all the fabrication stuff for like the other.
Yeah.
Which were, window displays, but not like the epic animatronic like Santa in Wonderland.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wasn't doing anything fabulous. I think I was like throwing glitter on something and painting signs. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. It's a gig.
It's a gig. So it was a gig and it was like super miserable. Like there was a punch clock and a bell that rang and it was just a horrible, horrible job.
Yeah.
And then,
was it based in Midtown?
Yeah, it was at Midtown Shop.
It's a hard place to work, right?
Yeah, it was gnarly. And then I didn't make any friends there. Everyone was gross. And then, and then I remember getting I met someone at the first shop I worked at, and then I got a call for a weekend fabrication gig. Mm-hmm. To help the stop motion animation show get up and running, get their sets up and running. And so I was like hired for a weekend and like stayed at that job for 4 years. And so that was at MTV Animation.
Oh, nice.
And so that was when I had like the one full-time job in my whole life.
You had to meet some cool people there.
I did. So that was like much funner. And so like my boss, we're still really good friends to this day.
Yeah.
And so I was like first round in, last one out. Like, and lots of people came and went throughout that whole show. And
now, did any of the stuff that you did over those years, does that enter your studio practice today?
Yeah, I mean, so when I got to town, I was like still making these like giant mountain sculptures that were sort of like this remnant of German Romanticism.
Mm-hmm. The Sublime.
The Sublime. I had these like monstrous mountain sculptures in my apartment in Greenpoint, and they were like hundreds of pounds. So when I would show them, it would take like two like sweaty dudes to like get it down the stairs.
Oh my God.
And so then when I got hired at MTV, it was like the cushiest, most like you could just go to the model shop. So it was that show Celebrity Deathmatch, and there was a model shop.
Remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
Wait, what year was that?
It was 97 to 2001.
Shit, was that long ago?
Yeah.
It feels not that long ago.
Yeah, I know. Well, it keeps coming back. That's probably what makes you think it's been not that long.
Yeah, but I remember when it came out.
Yeah. I know you might have been like, were you enjoying it, or you just like?
I guess I just was.
You knew it was.
I didn't really watch it. I just saw it.
Yeah, because it was like mostly like 12-year-old dudes.
Yeah.
That were into it.
Yeah.
But,
it was like claymation, like, yeah.
Sort of, no clay, but claymation. Yeah,
Or
it was like
that vibe.
It was like cast urethane heads and foam latex bodies.
Okay.
And so the model shop where all the puppets and sets were made, we could basically go in on the weekends and just crank stuff out.
Yeah.
And so that's when I discovered, the heads were cast out of this 2-part urethane resin, that smooth cast 300 stuff.
Not familiar with any of that.
It's like a super common.
Is it
it's like
toxic?
There's some right there. There's some like that. See that red stripe thing?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like a plastic. And
is it toxic or is it safe?
It's not good for you, but it's not like polyester resin.
It's not going to like destroy you immediately.
No, it's not going to destroy you immediately. And then it was pretty well ventilated shop. I mean, it was like a spray booth where you would cast stuff.
Right.
But so I started like noodling around with that material and just casting things, and I started making simultaneously the work that I was making was it's like pushing that idea of making the sculpture about a painting with like the parts and the impulses and the sort of the components of these paintings, like a still life painting, like trying to make a still life sculpture. That was my quest. And so I was casting these parts and using this material. And I don't think I really succeeded a lot. I don't think any of those sculptures were like very good, but they were important sort of process. And then I kind of like, I sort of like stripped away the components of the still life painting into like parts. And so it was like kind of like the components were sort of washing away, and I would look at a painting and think like, oh, well, like it's actually this fabric the fruits are on. It's kind of holding the tension of this thing. So I kind of like focused in on sort of gouache and sort of intricate paintings of like floors and walls and textile patterns. But then at the same time kind of like opening it up into sort of abstract representations of interior architecture. So kind of like sort of sprouting and moving in different directions. And so meanwhile, I was casting a lot of stuff in the shop at MTV. And I developed this, I just was like, I like this material. I like the kind of plasticiness of it. I like casting it. And then I got one of those Socrates things where I was like accepted into like a little exhibition there.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And the theme of the show was suburban architecture, or suburban landscape, excuse me. And so I had all this like interior architecture, like gouaches of like parquet floors and patterns and things. So then I took that sort of like the pattern of say a linoleum kitchen floor and transferred it to a big wall. So I made like a retaining wall at Socrates that was 200 feet long. And so it was basically like a kind of like quasi sort of watered down like Islamic motif that then gets kind of transferred, watered down into like say a like Ohio kitchen floor. So it was that sort of pattern. And I broke it down into these separate color parts and cast all those pieces, like hand cast all those tiles out of the same urethane material. And that kind of launched like the next chapter of my work, which was about sort of repetition and scale and architecture.
And pattern was
and pattern straight up. Like, I mean, the pattern had been like, once I kind of like turned my gaze to the floor and started doing these, I did lots and lots of these gouache sort of parquet floor drawings. That sort of, how I got so mesmerized by that sort of locked me into that. And then I haven't sort of shaken it. And then so the pattern and then the repeat and the variation within that repeat became a constant and still hanging around today.
Yeah. So, well, how has it mutated? I mean, because there's quite a gap in between now and then. How did it kind of
Well, it was interesting because like
around?
So I had this big old piece that I made at Socrates, and I was like, okay, I was like over budget, and I was like, I hand cast 30,000 individual tiles, and then had to like assemble all those little tiles into like square foot mosaic sections, and then built the substrate out at the park with a guy. I had like two guys out at the park, and I had a bunch of people in my studio casting stuff. I would like run back and forth, and then so I had like embarked on this project, and it was killing me. It was like so much work.
It's a lot of work.
So much work, and I was like super over budget. I was like, I gotta keep going. You know, when you're sort of like you're half in and you're like sink or swim again.
You can't bail.
I just threw money at it. I was like, I gotta realize this thing because I know it's gonna be like this. It's like this gateway, this like weird portal. So I pushed, and then I was like, okay, this is it worked out. I'm interested in this thing. And then so I basically developed a body of work from that same motif and just sort of like different colors, and started making like I started taking that same pattern and making sort of screen forms, these sort of modular sort of wall shaped pieces that had, say, big holes cut out of them, so they would like bisect the room in these sort of complicated ways where you could kind of see through the piece. And it was also like, so it was like space making, negating, creating, and things kept getting scaled up and up and up. And then by the end, I had made a piece that was like, you know, like 12 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet. And it needed like people to help me put it together, or say if someone's coming to the studio. And I just realized, like, okay, I sort of hit the back end of this particular project. I was sort of tired of the material. I was tired of the cost of the material. It probably wasn't good for me, you know, working with that material for so long.
And it sounds like a pretty big production.
It was a huge production. And then there was this other kind of interesting component where was that I haven't felt since that body of work, which was boredom, like production, like straight production. Because I would picture the piece, and then I was like, oh fuck, now I got to make it. And it would just be like, it would be like if you're like a long distance runner, like training for that run, like that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
And I haven't ever felt that since, really. Like now when I make something, even if it's repetitive, it's not like grinding production.
Well, it's almost like the sort of analogy of the running is interesting, because it's like that marathon finish line is so far away.
Yeah.
That you just have to slog and slog. But if you do more burst of sprints, you can keep your mind more activated, and everything's a little more fresh sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, some people love the marathon.
Right. Not me.
Yeah, but it's hard.
No, I'm like an intramural person. I need like constant change.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a circuit.
Yeah, circuit training. That's
what
me.
What were those things? Remember in grade school or high school, that would be like out on a field day or something where you'd go out and do like a circuit of different
that was like it was like I don't know what level of hell that was, but I was like not athletic in high school.
Well, the egg toss. Like anyone could do that.
Yeah,
one,
okay,
right?
I'm on board with an egg toss, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that just keeps you a little more
and I know now,
energized.
like I need like I need a lot going on. I like a lot going on.
Yeah.
In my studio, I like to work on a bunch of stuff at the same time.
Yeah, you've got it set up like it feels like stations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I kind of do that where as soon as I get, like, I've had enough of a big painting, I can go work on a collage or work on the computer, and then I'll move back to, you know what I mean? Like, just keeping it fresh in that sense.
Yeah. I know. I'd like to have like there's like those apps where you can like track like where you run.
Oh, right.
I'd like to have an app of like my foot pattern in here, just to like watch my brain activity.
The ant trail of like seeing where you move the whole
time. And then like it would log in like the nap.
Yeah. They must do that.
Yeah, I'm sure you could like your watch. You could probably like do that.
I watch a lot of soccer, and they'll do it once in a while during the game. They'll pick a player and they'll show you the heat map of where because now they all wear all those trackers.
Oh yeah.
Just everything is so scientific,
you
know, like their fitness.
Yeah.
But like it's really cool to see like where
they're going,
you know, like where they're focused,
tracked.
But yeah, you probably got that. In here, you'd have a pretty good heat map.
It's pretty good. I started tracking my steps lately, and I'm like, oh, I get a lot of steps in here.
Yeah, well, and you have stairs too, which is nice.
Yeah, and I've been trying to like embrace those stairs.
Yeah. So, like, what's a given studio day like? I mean, do you come in? Is it just based on like work that you're working towards, like a group of work, or is it, you know, you're just coming in, throwing yourself curveballs, or
you know, in that same vein of like I like variation. I have my work rhythms are I like variation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, for my entire adult life, I have been like a project-based person.
Yeah.
Whether it was like in the studio or like as my other life of like a worker, like a job having person.
Yeah.
So it was always like a period of a thing. So I like that rhythm, and so I definitely still kind of work like that. I work sort of like chunks and like projects, and in like between projects I'll have like a sort of I have no problem just sort of walking away from the studio for like a week or two, you know, because I work so super hard sometimes, like 7 days a week, like 14 hours a day, like figuring stuff out and working super hard. So, I mean, like best case scenario, I'd roll in at 10 and like leave, you know, at 6, but that's not really my style. I mean, I like being here in the morning, but I also super enjoy waking up at home and like doing whatever happens at home for like a couple hours and then coming here and then not having to worry about when I go home.
Right.
So I don't, you know, and I have a partner who doesn't really care about like any kind of like scheduling perfection either. So.
Right. Like, honey, you have to be home at 7 for dinner.
Yeah,
night.
never. Yeah.
Well, that's freeing.
So it's very like super spoiled, you know. I mean, I could probably use something to. In fact, I do often like. I need that like now.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you know obviously like people with children have a lot of like like let's wrap it up. I got to go and be a parent or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of not. It's never not there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's just always on the clock in one way or another. Even when you do have the time, you're like, all right, this is my time until this time, and then that's when I'm back.
Yeah.
Doing this or doing that. So, but yeah, I mean, I remember those days before having, you know, a child that where you know I could basically just work from 9 o'clock in the morning and then just keep going until I go to sleep, and there were a lot of days like that. But I do think that balance is nice. It sounds like you're getting that in the mornings where you take your time getting up and rolling and getting to the studio maybe.
I do, but then like sometimes there's like a period where, which I really enjoy that, but I also like a little more like go. So my boyfriend, so he works still in stop motion animation primarily. And then, so if he's on a gig, he's typically at this one production company where their studio is like a half a mile down the road. So maybe he'll work on a job for like 6 to 8 weeks, and then so we'll get up and we'll go, and I'll drop him off, and then I'll come to the studio. And so I'll get here at 9:30, 10, like for weeks on end. And then I do kind of feel like, oh, this is like the grown up way to be. Like, oh, this is how you're supposed to run a business.
Right.
But then left to my own devices, I lean towards like working toward into the night.
Yeah.
Like if I'm left without any normal scheduling devices.
Do you go out to see music ever?
I do sometimes, yeah. You know, now it's like kind of like a slightly like some sort of post-punk nostalgia tour. Like that's a lot of what I'll go see.
Right.
It's like whoever's back out on tour, and sometimes they're like super good still, and sometimes it's like, oh yeah,
depressing.
It's not quite.
You're like, this isn't really.
yeah. But yeah, like I got on that mailing list for you know that Blank Forms.
I don't.
Blank Forms. It's some kind of like booking thing, or like they organize shows, and they're always like kind of like freaky and cool and like unusual new music, like international stuff. So, like I've seen like this Indonesian duo that's I think called Senwaya.
That's cool.
And like this Japanese quartet at Pioneer Works that was like a 3-hour improvisational set.
So it's just like a mailing service. They let you know.
Service. Yeah, and they programmed they curated the music program for Josiah McElhenney's show at Cohen.
Yeah. I know. I saw. I didn't.
It was an amazing program. I saw nothing. I saw none of it. So I don't think I also like pay attention when shows are going to happen. So like a lot of times some like old timer who's rolling in, like whatever. I'll hear through 2 steps away, like some guy who I know who's in a bunch of bands, like he's like, oh, so-and-so's coming to town.
Yeah.
And
then that's kind of how, it's funny because in playing music and then going out to see so many shows when I was younger, how important that was.
So important.
And it's still, I love seeing live music, but it's just hard to get around to doing it as much as I used to.
Yeah.
But I've been fortunate enough to collaborate with a lot of musicians, and that kind of forces me to get out. Because if friends of mine are playing, then I know about it because I'm just social networks. I see, I'm playing here tonight. I'm like, I'm going to go see that, So that's kind of a nice way to keep plugged into it. Because then you also feel kind of like personally, creatively connected to what they're doing. But it is hard to just keep on, because it's kind of like a thing that you got to keep up on. Yeah, and I'm not dying to be smashed. I get a little bored. Like, I mean, remember like in Minneapolis, that whatever that venue was in Minneapolis where they do the showcases? And then it was like when like
Soul Asylum and like Replacements, like that era.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they had, there was, I forget the name of the venue, but it was like a showcase. So there'd be 5 bands and every band would play like 3 to 5 songs. I'm like, that's to me like the perfect set.
yeah.
And like,
not
I'd
the
say
2
like,
hour long gigs.
rarely have I ever craved an encore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you hit the point where you're like, all right, that's enough.
I'm like, I'm
We're
good.
going.
Yeah. So I do like, you know, and it kind of gets a little draggy. Although, like that 3-hour Japanese improvisational thing, like
yeah.
it could have gone on for 3 more hours, and I would be super into it.
That sounds pretty cool.
So I mean, people were like laying on the floor, and like you could there was 4 stations where each guy had like a pile of like detritus and amps or whatever, like mic detritus, and then one guy's station was just like knobs, you know.
Mm-hmm. Sounds pretty cool.
I can't even remember what they were called, but they were fantastic. So sometimes I have like zero boredom, but I think if it's more kind of like wander off in your mind in that kind of improvisation stuff, like say like Indian music or something, where you're just like you hit the sort of boredom and then you push through to some other state of mind.
Like meditative.
I like that.
Yeah. Like the raga sort of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen things like that in a long time. But
I know,
those are
it's
really
been a
nice
while.
because you can kind of hit this other plane.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's just like a pop band playing, you're like, okay, there's 10 songs, I get it.
There's few surprises.
Yeah, it can be great, but then it doesn't hold you in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, when I was young and going to shows, there was like a danger level. You know what I mean? Like, like there was something scary. I remember seeing like the Butthole Surfers, and like they were clearly super tripping, and like it was just like in the 80s.
Yeah.
Or like I remember seeing this band Crash Worship. There were people who were fucking against the stage.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And like 50-gallon drums were on fire in a room, in a venue. It was crazy.
They don't make them like they used to. I mean, I guess in late 80s or 90s, they had the hair metal stuff where you could have gotten a fire. Like some guy's hair catching on fire or something. But it's pretty much not the same thing.
So the danger, like, and if it is dangerous, I'm usually like, I'm going to bail. Although I did go see some like, you know, whatever, like code violation type situations where a friend of mine is deeply into oh crap, what's it called? I'm totally spacing out. So it's like Cuban. Oh, I'm totally forgetting what it's called.
A kind of music?
Yeah.
And it's
Afro-Cuban. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, so we go see these like these music performances in like all these crazy places all over town. So he did this one show in this like basement of a housing project in the Bronx where it was like things could have caught on fire, and like people couldn't have, the egresses were blocked. So like, and I did that in the last like decade where I'm normally not going
like a risky
where
show.
like you're gonna maybe die.
Like Afro-Cuban jazz or something?
No,
not salsa, bachata.
Reggaeton. It'll come back to me. It's like I'm sorry, I totally forgot.
When you remember, we'll just edit that in.
I'll just bark it out.
Meringue. It'll just pop in there in a totally different microphone sound.
Yeah,
we were talking about. Yeah, but yeah, I guess that's, you know, the adrenaline of those kind of things keep you in the moment. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't been to shows like that, and I think I did. There's an old band that used to play on bills that my band played in back in, you know, the early 2000s, and they were kind of like the screamo band, you know. And I did the artwork for the record, so I went to see their show. They played at St. Vitus in Greenpoint.
Oh,
you know, that metal bar.
Yeah.
Which is wild, but it was really cool to see, and there was activities going on in front of a lot of like movement and physical aggression, and I was like, I'm going to stay way in the back.
Yeah. I was never like in the thick of it kind of person.
Never. Yeah, I was never the mosh pit person.
Yeah.
I always loved going to see Fugazi and waiting for Ian to like yell at the people up front.
Cool it down.
Yeah. Like it had to happen. Like he had to yell at them.
Right.
Once.
He's always been dad.
Yeah. Just laying down the law for the kids.
Even way back, he was always had like a dad vibe.
Yeah, definitely. He's like an old man, probably trapped in a young person's body.
I think so. He always felt a little mature back then.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about the work now and like what you're doing.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Okay. So after that period where I was making those sort of large sort of screen type forms, these sort of large sculpture kind of architectural interventions, I just was like, okay, I'm done with this work. And then I think I sat in my studio for 6 months, like kind of staring at the wall, just not quite knowing what next. And then I had had a gallon of this Venetian plaster in my studio I'd actually like coated out my bathroom with it. And I had seen one of those like Albers pieces that are in the Yale Museum. They're kind of classics where he carves into the sign, like the label making technique where you like carve in, that body of work. Yeah. So I saw those and I was like, oh, the sort of depth and the honesty of like opening up that material and revealing the next material beneath it really kind of hit me. Yeah. Because I had been for a while. One of the things about the cast urethane was that I was interested in the pigment went all the way through. It wasn't a topical painting. It was like the pigment was like all the way through the piece. Saturated and like it just the color was the thing. It wasn't like on top. It was like
right.
So that kind of, I don't know, I was into that piece, and then so I took some of that plaster and just masked off a piece of area on my wall and troweled on a bunch of joint compound and then troweled on some black plaster on top of that and drew into it. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting, I responded to the material. I responded to the way it looked, the way it worked, the way it acted. And so then I sort of transferred that Venetian plaster onto a series of MDF panels I had just had hanging around the studio. And that was like, oh, this is interesting. I like this. And I started embedding metal into it and like sort of like a inlay, like metal inlay with these same sort of like geometric kind of architectural forms. And then also kind of like responding to the sort of like Louis Kahn material cast, irregular, kind of broken down, cruddy cement sort of texture of the plaster, sort of masking off areas that. So then I would have these like stepped areas to the painting, but meanwhile still having like a pretty basic geometric form. And then so I did that for like, I first started working with that material 12 years ago, and I'm still use it every day. I love it. I love the material. And then so I just sort of like wandered with this material, with this body of work for so many years, and just kind of next thing I knew I was like a painter. Like people were calling me a painter.
But you saw it as a sculptural thing.
Yeah. I think
the physicality of it.
I think it is a painting, but I'm not a painter.
Yeah.
I think there's like something there. And then, I mean, I use a brush. I mean, I prime the panels with a paintbrush and a paint. But beyond that, I use like a plasterer's tool to build up the layers, and I'll mask things off. I'll depending on the complexity of the painting, I'll generate like a complex mask and like trowel on a bunch of plaster and then peel that mask up and like just keep like stacking levels.
Yeah. So in a way, it's kind of like printmaking.
I use a lot of printmaking. I kind of stumbled into printmaking where I didn't mean to. So I was making these paintings that were like just troweled and masked and like sort of basic forms. And then one day my neighbor across the street in my old studio had seen me do some like, I'd done some like MDF wood block printmaking in my studio. Where I was just kind of messing around, and then he'd seen what I was up to, and he had one of these like hobbyist silkscreen machines called a U-Do, where like housewives could like make T-shirts and napkins,
right?
And Michaels marketed it. So he handed me this thing, and it changed my life. Like now like the screen printing of this plaster is so integral to the way that the paintings are made. And then so from that, like I've just been screening the plaster for like nearly a decade. Yeah. And that's like part of the layering of the how I make the paintings.
Right.
And then
do you feel like a kinship to kind of like brutalism and that sort of neo-concretism? And
I don't even know. I think if there's something closer than kinship. It's like I spring from that really directly.
Did you see that Legia Clark show at MoMA?
Yes. Oh, please. That was so good.
Like those interchangeable sculptures.
Those things are so part of me that I don't even, I mean, I know that everyone responds to them so emotionally. But yeah, those pieces, and it's interesting because I see a lot of, so now I'm kind of like looping back to sculpture. And there's like people who make sculpture that are, making like some of my friend Sarah Peters, who's like her relationship to sculpture is so old fashioned. It's so epic and like layered and stepped, and like ultimately with these bronze beauties, like. And then there's a lot of people making sculptures that I see that are operating with like kind of like a flat pack technology.
Yeah.
So and it sometimes feels a little like non-committal, like easy. And so, but then I see those Ligia Clark pieces, and they're like basically flat pack technology,
right?
And they're so poetic, and they're so perfect.
Well, it's the patina of age, and when it came about, I think,
and her like the performance element, and like her whole relationship to like the body and movement and clothing and being female ultimately.
Yeah, it can be really confusing if you see images, like if you don't experience it firsthand, I think, or read about it. You know what I mean? Like you're like, wait, what is going on here?
I know.
But then if you take a deeper look, which a lot of things in life take that, you know what I mean? It's really amazing, like that body of work.
Oh, no, it's just one of my like top people. I just like, I mean, because you know the obviously like the paintings and the sculptures are like, I spring from that as well. Like that's where you can clearly see what I like by my body of work.
Right.
Like who are my heroes, you know?
Yeah. And it's like I can't help but think of like some of those Stereolab record covers of like that kind of sort of mod graphic sensibility of like super graphics and stuff, but where it's taken to some sort of new expressive place, you know. And I would imagine that might be up your alley.
It's in there. I mean, I think the work was like I think repetition and pattern made a baby that is op in my work, but I wasn't driving towards op. Like I wasn't like, oh, I need to make something op.
Yeah.
But it just sort of like one move led to another move where like now I work in the studio, and each new thing that I do is out of some like not quite nailing it before, which I think is like where I'm like the most healthy and productive and fertile, is like, oh wait, maybe I should try this, maybe I should try that, you know, like that one time in grad school where I like nailed it and I couldn't move.
Yeah.
So I think not being happy with something to like, I don't know what the proper healthy percentage is what keeps me like, oh, I need to like try this other move. And then a lot of times I'll build projects, like I'll build a body of paintings, or like I've started working on these kind of like printed linen textile installations.
Yeah. Those things.
That stuff. And so I'll figure them out what they're going to be like in Photoshop. And then so as I'm trying to figure out what they're going to be, I'll do like 5 or 6 iterations. And so then all those kind of like generating like digital sketches make more ideas for more things. And so and then I started making some sculptures out of cast steel. Steel and porcelain enamel. And so I feel like now I'm at this point where these little like floating islands are kind of coming together in this like one blobular form of like painting, sculpture, textile. That is kind of where I come from, you know, like architect and a clothing designer.
Yeah, it's funny, right? It all comes back to the beginning in a way.
It does, in like a really comfortable, warm way. It's not like I had like an amazing, perfect childhood, but like there were some moments where like when you're surrounded by a certain kind of like visual stimuli,
it imprints on your brain, right? In a way,
I think
unconsciously.
So. But it imprints on a way that like, I mean, it shocks me that like is such a like comfortable thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like going home.
Yeah, but I don't like going home.
Right.
So that's why it's shocking.
But it's almost like going home, not now, but then you're almost like in a feeling of...
Yeah.
Or like recapturing your youth.
I know, because none of that feels right to me, but like there's something that's like, but I definitely admired like what my parents were up to. Like their path in life was something else. Like, oh, that's an interesting path in life. Or my stepfather, he ran a business that was like him and like maybe an assistant, and they did small projects.
Yeah.
And then my mom had her thing, and it was like interesting, and she was super busy and doing cool stuff. So they were good role models of like traveling down your own path and like creating your destiny and like making this thing, you know, come hell or high water.
Yeah. The other quotient I think is that they feel sonic.
The work.
Yeah.
I think so.
There's like sound
Because there's a
waves or
rhythm. There's like
there's
a
movement pulsing,
right, like a rock and water.
Yeah, whereas a lot of that kind of graphic, like the super graphic thing or the, that design installation pop kind of stuff feels kind of static. But there was a lot of, early animation stemming back from like Hans Richter and Eggleston and stuff that has a sensibility of that movement where it's operating in this sort of thin, I don't know, mystery land. You know what I mean? And it kind of has that feel to it.
I try. I mean, one of the things I try and make sure is like a loose and kind of sloppy way that I print make. I try and have it be sort of like as untight as possible.
Yeah, no,
but still maintaining because with those sort of fabric installations, they need to hang a certain way in order for the thing to work visually.
Right.
But I want it to have a handmade feel. I want it to the materials that I choose and the processes are all kind of like I print on that linen. I want it to be a really nubby, natural, beautiful linen, and then the sculptures are steel, and then the enamel is glass. So this I want these things to be sort of basic, kind of earthy materials, and then on top of that is layered this sort of crisp imagery. And then from there, and then after that, then they start to fall apart again. They start to be sloppy and smudgy, and you can see when you get to the paintings, you see pencil lines that are how I kind of lay it out and how to make the painting. And I'm sort of grabby and smudgy, and I like the thing to have some sort of history marks on it. Yeah,
they feel it feels like they're their own world in a way, but it's organic and it's moving and it's not just an image,
right?
That's just made. It's just organic, living, breathing thing and process that moves across these different areas of working. I sort of surprised myself how I've hunkered down on this particular language, say for the last 2 years. Because prior to that I had maybe 4 bodies of work that were kind of I would weave them in and out, kind of I'm going to experiment with that thing again, or I'm going to switch back over to this other thing. And so I feel I have these horses in the stable that are still waiting to be rode again, to run together.
Or just so it's an interesting sort of chapter right now where I look forward to sort of whatever happens.
Well, it's exciting group of stuff that I feel you can't really. I love work where you can't really fully understand what's going on completely. You know what I'm saying? There's these different components which are really intriguing in different ways, and it'll be exciting to see where it goes. I mean, do you have anything coming up or anything that you can share with people as far as how they can see your work or the best places to engage with what you're doing?
Well, let's see. I am doing more and more. It's interesting. I'm sort of finding myself collaborating with architects and architecture, and so for better or for worse, that's typically a private space,
right?
So that's kind of a bummer. But then Instagram is kind of nice because then you just post a picture of it. But then the amount of people that get to experience these things is small. So that's the kind of the heartache of that. But then I'm doing a show in the fall in Los Angeles in a nice artist run space called Odd Arc.
Okay.
And then I probably will do some art fair stuff, which is whatever, for better or for worse. It's
well, people see it.
A ton of people see your work.
Yeah.
A ton. So much more than when you have an exhibition.
Totally.
It's really that's the gnarly truth of that.
Yeah.
But just some group show stuff and some stuff that's kind of pending. But as far as seeing my work, it's easy to see online, I guess, a little bit. But
do you envision that some of those sort of private, sort of architectural spaces that you're working within can lead to more public, large scale things that more people will be able
hopefully
to see?
I mean, I am finding myself lately on more and more short list situations for public art stuff. I haven't had one sort of be finalized with me as the winner yet, but more and more I'm sort of finding myself in that situation. So I feel hopefully
it's a matter of time.
Hopefully something will pan out.
That would be cool to see.
I'm into scaling up. I like the I did a project this past summer that was one of those sort of fabric installations in Bridgehampton out in Long Island.
Yeah.
And it was big. It was big. It was like 13 feet tall, and like it was whatever 21 times 3 feet is. You know, it was like 21 panels, sort of wrapping around this giant room. So when things scaled way up, I was like, oh, this is I like this. It's exciting to sort of like have it really like push. So I'm interested in that sort of scaled up thing.
Right. But not. We're going to keep it out of that Socrates thing of like where it takes.
Yeah. Well, luckily I feel like I've come back around where like I know how to ask for things a little bit better. I know how to like budget things a little bit better.
Plan it out.
I was like, it was new. I was like just sort of sorting out like how you do stuff. So yeah, hopefully next time maybe a slightly bigger budget.
And and you have all that experience, you know, to navigate that stuff.
Yeah.
It's such a different can of worms to work in, like in public spaces or bigger spaces, and like how you work on the budget and all that stuff. It's so different than just being in the studio working on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I know.
But
and I was just talking about that, like how like with public art, like something kind of dies a little bit. Like it's never the perfect thing. Like it's like with especially with outdoor work, like you got something dies a little bit in the work. So hopefully one day I can make that piece. I can make a piece that does live outside, that is like full on the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like you have to make all these like compromises with like whatever weather and people who chime in on like how they want it to be or something like that.
But the uptick is that so many people see it.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's different than a gallery where it's a destination. I mean, people just find the work, which is nice too.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the art in the subways now. It's like getting better and better.
Definitely. And imagine how many people, I mean, more people see that work in a day than might see that artist's work in a lifetime. In
I know.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and then the weird thing is you can touch it.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
You can walk up and you're like, oh, that's that thing. I mean, I don't think, they barely touch that stuff. The artists, it's just mostly those mosaic artisans. But still, there's something like really intimate. Like I just was rubbing those dogs at 23rd Street yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something just so intimate about that.
Definitely. Yeah, that's cool. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much for having me over. It was really cool to chat and to meet and to see your stuff. And I look forward to seeing your shows in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sound and Vision is recorded, edited, and produced by myself, Brian Alfred. You can find out more about the podcast and donate to it at soundandvisionpodcast.com. You can find more images on Instagram at soundandvisionpodcast. You can find more information about my work at brianalfred.net or on Instagram at alfredstudio. Many thanks to Golden for supporting the podcast. Many thanks to Evan Marion for the intro-outro music and Michael Lovett for the introduction. Don't forget to stop by the Patreon page for the podcast, patreon.com/soundandvisionpodcast. You can donate a very small amount on there or more if you'd like, and you can get your name featured on a future podcast, and you can also get a hand-drawn thank you from yours truly. Thanks so much. Thanks for supporting the podcast. Head over to iTunes, leave a rating and review if you can. Thanks for listening.